Díomh agus fáilte óg go dtí an cuite den cruinniú den údarás pólíonnachta cruinniú deireadh nach na bliana seo agus cruinniú nach raibh ag súil gombeach againn na gombeach an cuid den cruinniú seo ar fáil go peibli mar nar héilimar gombeach gáis ach ag ascairt as na himachtaí éitimachar sráid na bhlá clia ag deireadh mí na saona héilimar nar bhiste gombeach deis againn an ceist roinn ceistena a play leis an Commissioner ag ascairt asta. This meeting, or this section of this meeting, is being held in public, which wasn't originally part of our plan, but arising from the events that took place in Dublin at the end of November, we thought it proper that there should be an opportunity for the authority to engage with the Commissioner and his colleagues in a live-streamed section of our meeting today, so that some of the issues that arose can be discussed and people can have access to that engagement. And the Commissioner immediately agreed to our suggestion. Before we move on to this item on public order, I just want to make reference to one other item of business. We've discussed it in private with the Commissioner. It will be remembered that the issue of the operation of CAD 999 and the cancellation of unwarranted cancellation of a range of incidents some years ago has been the subject of considerable discussion and independent evaluation and a great deal of work within the Garda Síochána organisation over the past 2-3 years. And the authority had commissioned an external review initially by Derek Penman, and we asked him to come back and look at the extent to which his recommendations were being implemented. That report has just been received by the authority. We will give it detailed consideration, but it is important to say that it paints a very positive picture of a great deal of the work that has been done. There are one or two elements that we will want to discuss with the Commissioner in public in January, when the report will have been published by the authority and will have been submitted to the Minister after our own opportunity to review it. But one of the abiding elements in our engagement with this issue from the very beginning has been the consistent and constant insistence of the importance of the 999 service and the constant reassurance to the public that the 999 service is there to be used and that it should be used, and it is to be relied upon, and it provides an essential service to people who are in difficulty. And perhaps, Commissioner, you might want to add something to that or say something in that respect, and the other issues can be discussed in more detail in next month.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, it's a very much a regrettable fact of life in policing that the amount of domestic abuse cases that are reported to in Garda Síochána, as with many other police services, they do increase over the Christmas period. And so we would say to any victim, immediately make contact with Garda Síochána, use the 999 system to get assistance immediately, particularly if you've been a victim or you are in active danger in terms of a crime in action. Please use the 999 system to reach out to Garda Síochána. But also then to other victims of crime, the 999 system is there for you as well. We've made a huge investment in our Garda Safe, our command control processes, and that will reap benefit in terms of the quality of service provided. But just wanted to make that particular mention around domestic abuse and the inevitable spike there'll be over the holiday period, as we've seen in other years. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We now move on to the main item on the agenda, which is public order policing, which is a broad category of policing activity, but it is inescapably located in the context of the events that happened in Dublin in November for today's conversation. And as we have said before, and as the Commissioner has repeated on a number of occasions, the underlying issue that has to be recalled in the context of the 23rd of November was the attack on 3 children and on their carer, and the horrific nature of that assault, unwarranted, out of the blue, visiting horrible danger on innocent children in a very difficult circumstance, and being a source of immense trauma and problem for their families, for all the other children who were there, and for their families too. And there is a risk, a danger, that because of the very significant focus on the events that followed that day, that those latter events might overshadow the reality of the experience of those children, their carer, and all of their families. And it is absolutely important and essential that that not be forgotten, that they not be forgotten, and that the awfulness of that event, if nothing else had happened on that day, that would be something that would have shocked us all by by the very nature of the event and the very essence of its character. We said that knowing very little about it at the time at the public meeting in Waterford, and knowing what we do know now, it's important that we emphasise that again and not lose sight of the awfulness of that event. We have also, in public commentary since, and as has the Commissioner and his colleagues, recognised the fact that when events like this take place and when the subsequent events happened, the Gardaí are among those who are first on the scene, and the Gardaí are those who alone are charged with the responsibility of and have the capacity to attempt to hold the line when public disturbances take place. And we commend and recognise the commitment and the fortitude and the resilience of the Gardaí who were involved throughout the 23rd of November afternoon, evening and night, and who have been constantly engaged since in the task of ensuring that people are safe and that it is possible for people to move around, and that the city and the life of individuals and families are not affected beyond that particular day by the events that took place. And some we know were injured. Assaults were visited upon people in an unwarranted way, missiles thrown at them, and as I say, we commend their resilience and their restraint in the face of that. For this afternoon's engagement with the Commissioner and his colleagues, Paul McGeehan is going to lead on the questions.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioner and colleagues. I think, Commissioner, since the night of the 23rd, I've heard you say in the media and in various other fora that lessons will be learned by yourselves as to what happened, what went well on the night, and maybe what could be improved upon if such events were to take place in the future. And I understand that there is a review being undertaken, I think being led by Assistant Commissioner Cleary. And I just wonder, could you tell us a little bit about that review, what it's going to look at, and the timescale for it?
Okay, so in the first place, well, if I may also just echo the comments of the Chair in respect of how this event happened, and also the immeasurable trauma visited upon the children and their teacher at 1:30 on the afternoon of the 23rd of November. And then also, as I've said many times before, how events unfolded from being this dreadful stabbing incident to protest activity in effect at our cordon line, the speed with which misinformation was spread on social media, how that in effect then motivated people to come to the city centre, and then how that evolved then into riot and indeed looting. So a very difficult night for Dublin, a very difficult night for policing, but it should be said that Garda Síochána responded with great courage, great resilience and determination, both Garda staff and Garda members, in terms of making sure that we were able to deal with the disorder and bring, in effect, a state of peace back to our streets as quickly as possible. So what we did immediately then in the aftermath was we sought assistance from PSNI in terms of the loan of 2 water cannon. They do remain with us and do remain on loan to Garda Síochána, and I will make a decision then along with colleagues in the new year as to whether to extend that loan or not, based on just what we think the public order threat picture is. Then also beyond that, then we had from the 20th of September had 2 public order units on throughout the day, so 1 unit on at a time, and there was an overlap period. That's now being increased to 2 on at any one time, plus then just a big effort around visibility in the city centre, and I think that's reaped benefits in terms of sentiment and confidence within the city centre, and I'll turn to Cliona to talk about that shortly. But AC Cleary was charged with doing what we call an operational debrief, and if it might be instructive then for Paul to set out what he's done so far. The report is expected this week, but then that report then will inform the review, because it'll be a comprehensive document from our learnings from that night and how then that should impact upon our procedures and policy, and then procedures and training then in turn as well. So is it okay to turn to
Of course,
AC
yeah.
Cleary?
I just be conscious of time, because we're sort of pressed for time a little bit this afternoon, but yes, certainly, absolutely, Assistant Commissioner.
Okay, so as the Commissioner outlined, I was tasked with the operational debrief report on the serious incidents and the violent disorder, which occurred on the 23rd. So basically my report will outline the Garda response to this serious public disorder and allow those involved in the policing of these events to communicate their experiences, tell us what went well and what didn't go well, and identify the operational learnings and the organisational learnings. So the methodology has a number of phases, including desktop research, information requests, questionnaires, data mining, and comprehensive review of reports received. It also included the review of prior reports on incidents of violent disorder. And I've also tasked GSAS to prepare a comprehensive timeline of events as they unfolded on the 23rd, and they will be included in the report, and they are quite comprehensive. The report is based on the principles of accuracy, objectivity and transparency, and it presents information based on verifiable data, ensuring that the findings and conclusions are unbiased and reflect a true account of the events. So the findings include examples of the dedication, the bravery and professionalism demonstrated by members of Garda Síochána, who put themselves in harm's way to keep the people of Dublin safe. The serious public disorder event was challenging to police, given the spontaneous, dynamic and volatile nature of the occurrences. And the resilience shown by members of Garda Síochána in their response is commendable and resulted in no loss of life. While it is important to state the positives, it's also important that we use the insights into the report into what didn't go well to build on our existing capabilities to ensure we are adequately prepared for the future. It is apparent after these riots that the organisation has a number of policy, equipment and training gaps that need to be addressed. So we identified 464 members who were engaged in some way on duty in the policing of those events on the 23rd. So I've sought comprehensive reports from the strategic, operational and tactical levels. For example, 1 AC, AC Richardson, 3 Chief Superintendents, 3 Superintendents and the 2 Public Order Inspectors who were pivotal on the day. So the feedback that we received, so we sent out a questionnaire on top of that to 286 members, and responses were received from 176, which is a 62% response, which is good in the very short time frame and the limitations that gives us. The feedback we received, some of the questions were, we'd say, was your training adequate? Was your equipment adequate? What went well? What didn't go well? That type of thing, to try paint a picture for us of exactly. So a lot of the feedback come up in the same areas around communications, equipment, coordination and planning, training and tactics. And I'll give you a flavour of the recommendations that we're going to make and why, if we have time. But 13 members were injured on the day. 3 members attended hospital, including 1 who had a severed toe. I've also requested a community impact assessment report, which is being finalised, and I'm of the understanding that the community impact is assessed as medium, and there'll be further detail of that in the final report shortly. As part of this impact, we 497 business premises were canvassed, 58 reported criminal damage, and then the much publicised damage to one tram, number of buses and 11 Garda vehicles.
I wonder, sorry, Assistant Commissioner, can I just interrupt you there? Because I think I'll maybe come back to the issue about the impact on the community later. But can I just understand the process then? You're going to complete this report and you're going to provide that to the Commissioner, and then at that point, Commissioner, there's going to be a further review, is that right?
Yeah, well, so AC Hillman has the lead for public order policy in the organisation. So there's an inspector report from 2019, and many of the recommendations in that are incomplete, and there are some policies actually just to be, in effect, finished off at the senior leadership executive level. But that work is complete in terms of the quarterly governance meeting around public order, the training, equipment, command and control, and also the writing of the strategic threat assessment for public order as well. So all of those are in place. So what I wanted then was for this debrief to be done and done quickly, as it has been done, and then that then to inform further review. So in effect, plugging into the existing governance arrangements around public order. And so I just think from the night and our experience of the night, the equipment that we had, and what was a very fast flowing situation, particularly when we started to move in on the rioters and to, well, one, bring the disorders in the end, but also make arrests, and just how our tactics held up in respect of that. And also then a review of their protective equipment. Certainly we want to learn from the debrief, but what worked well around the protective equipment. But also one of the immediate responses was the enhanced incapacitant spray, and how well that worked actually on the night in terms of protecting officers, but also then dealing with outbreaks of disorder in front of them as well. So that was an immediate response just based on the immediate feedback we received that evening.
Okay, and just again for clarity, the debrief that Assistant Commissioner Cleary will do, will that be provided to the authority?
Well, one of the issues there that Paul rightly highlighted was in terms of transparency. It may be confidential, but it can be shared in that form in terms of what's said within it, because I'd imagine that some individuals would be identifiable in terms of their position and what their responsibility was. So, but beyond that, then I think there'd be a further conversation as we develop into the review. We're not at a standing start in terms of review. The implementation of the 2019 report has been ongoing, and we have an existing framework in effect to plug in this operational debrief. And that'll not really finish it either. We'll hear more from the staff associations. We'll hear more in terms of feedback from the organisation and from the various learning points as well. Okay. But we do want to build on the operational debrief and the experience of that night.
Okay, and just again to be clear, I've got a couple of sort of yes or no questions. On the night, is it correct that it was Assistant Commissioner Richardson who was in overall command?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
And I know that you talked about a number of policies arising from the Inspectorate report that are maybe not quite yet in place, but I think one of those is in relation to the policy on critical incidents. Is it the case that the riots were considered as a critical incident or would be considered as such if the policy was in place?
Well, I think you have to go back to the initial incident, which was a critical incident, and then the particular day has a number of parts, which starts off with a dreadful attack, and then the protest and the attempt actually, which to breach our cordon line, then followed by serious damage to property, followed then by looting. So there's a number. There is a number of episodes within like the continuum of everything that happened, but like all of those would easily reach the critical incident threshold, and in effect then regional control in the form of AC Richardson stepped in, plus then the chief superintendents then in both divisions, and the chief superintendent for public order.
Okay, and there have been a number of media reports, and I just wanted to check with you about the accuracy of some of them. Is it true that there were some members deployed who did not have earpieces in order to receive communication from the centre?
So one of the biggest pieces of feedback that we received related to communications and issues that members had on the ground with communications. And I think some members did have earpieces, but unfortunately the public order members wear helmets, and they didn't have earpieces in the helmet, which is one of the recommendations that I've made, that we have helmets that are either adaptable for earpieces, or we can get earpieces moulded that will fit into them. So yeah, that was an issue for members on the ground.
Okay. And how did communication then take place? Because I presume Assistant Commissioner Richardson is, I'm not entirely sure where you were, but you're somewhere in Dublin directing this operation, and you've got chief supers or supers underneath you, but then there are units deployed on the street. How did the communication system work if we had some of these issues around earpieces, etc.?
Yes, well, I was in the control room in Store Street with the Chief Superintendent in North Central. I was in communication with the Chief Superintendent in South Central, over in the south side of the city, and also then in communication with the Public Order Commander, the Chief Superintendent in charge of the Public Order Unit. So I was in a position to be able to see all those, in the control room, to be able to see what was happening, to be able to liaise with my team in relation to it. And the communications were ongoing between control, the Regional Control Centre, and also directly with the members on the ground and the commander on the ground.
Okay, but and I don't want to get bogged down in the detail around this, but were the difficulties in relation to communication with Garda members actually on the ground, let's say in the public order unit, who didn't have earpieces, were those a challenge, those difficulties a challenge on the night? If I had been a member of the public order unit, would have, I think it's apparent from what Assistant Commissioner Cleary said that some members have concerns around that.
Yeah, and I suppose that will form part of the review in relation to it. However, what I will say is that there is a certain training that the public order unit do in relation to it, that they act as a unit, so they would have their commander in relation to it in their units in that stage. But again, that will be part of Paul.
Yeah, okay. Communications forms an extensive part of this, and just to be clear, members were very aware on the ground in the public order unit on the front line, whether they're in the front line or the line behind uniform members, because they operate as a team, as a group. So you have the team, the sergeant, the inspector. You also had superintendents on the ground. So communications did get to the front line, and you can see from the footage that we have that they were able to move in unison in accordance with the instructions they were given. But for the sake of completeness, we want to see these earpieces in the helmets, and we've recommended that. The other areas of communication that we're recommending is, for example, loud hailers as well. And also I know there's already work being done on our mobility app for incident response, review the Tetra radios. We've done a lot of work on communications, but the biggest feedback from the members was in the public order, who were recommending that they should have earpieces inbuilt.
And can you also tell me, is it true that some members had to pick up public order gear from home before they were deployed?
Yes.
Okay. And is it also true that some members attended on foot of maybe some informal communication within the organisation who were not deployed, who were not asked to be deployed? In other words, did some members voluntarily just turn up because they knew there was a serious incident in Dublin without being officially asked to come to the scene?
Yeah, I can confirm that. We did send out official communications looking for a public order unit and extra resources around. But again, by nature, and Garda Síochána are very sort of proactive in relation to when they see their colleagues in difficulty and challenging circumstances like that. They did volunteer without being asked in relation to it, and we got to a point where we actually said to members later on that night, they were coming from other areas of the country, that, you know, to hold back because they were willing to come in to help their colleagues in relation to it. But again, the formal communication went out in relation to public order units when required.
Okay. Was any order issued on the night with regards to the use of force?
When they're in the situation in relation to it, they all have the powers in relation to it. They can use force, particularly in situations like that.
Yeah, but sorry, I'm just asking from yourself or from the centre. Was any order issued in relation to the use of force? In other words, either circumstances are such now that you can use force or that you shouldn't use force?
Well, there's a graduated response in relation to the public order unit in relation to how they deploy. So once they do deploy, there's different tactics involved in relation to that. I'm not too sure that's an operational point of view.
I know one of the chief superintendents has outlined in his report that he gave an instruction to lock and load buttons and also for lock and shields, moving forward with shields, and there was shield strikes as a result of that manoeuvre. It's a tactical manoeuvre. So that would in part answer your question in relation to the use of force. Use of force is another significant area where we've done a lot of work on in that, and we know from the accounts given and from what we've seen that members were utilising, for example, OC incapacitants grade, which had to be resupplied because they ran out of it. We know that they did use shield strikes and handcuffs and that, so we know that force was used on the night.
Okay. Commissioner, the next day you yourself issued, I don't know whether it was an order or a clarification or a statement in relation to the use of force, I think to all members. Why did you feel it necessary to do that?
I think the immediate feedback, and it just, I think, related to some of the images that were on social media, suggested that there was an apprehension in respect of using baton or using whatever equipment that was given them. So obviously there's incapacitant spray and also handcuffs. So in asking then for the operational debrief, AC Riots has spent time delving into that issue, but just I wanted the Garda members to know that actually the responsibility and obligation placed on us all in terms of preventing crime, but also protecting themselves, the public and their colleagues, and just to make that absolutely clear. And so the next morning also we were facing a scenario where intelligence, and certainly that on social media, was suggesting further protests on the Friday and then into the weekend. Now, they didn't come to pass in terms of number or even just the number of events that were suggested. So the situation just changed over that weekend, particularly as the water cannon arrived that afternoon into the evening, and we had individuals we trained that Friday evening, and we had the water cannon then operationally available then for the next day. But AC Cleary might just be able to give an outline on just some of the feedback received about use of force.
Well, sorry, before if you don't mind, because I'm certainly pressed for time in relation to my section of this, so sorry to cut across you, Assistant Commissioner, but either Commissioner or Assistant Commissioner, you may wish to answer this. I mean, do you feel that members are unclear in general about when they are allowed to use force?
No, they have to apply the Garda decision-making model, but they should know in the face of, and I think it's my responsibility to say to them, to make it clear to them again what our responsibility is as an organisation, and as the Commissioner, what is expected of them, particularly in the face of such violence. And for many there, it would have been the first time they'd seen such violence, and it hasn't been seen for a long time, even by anyone who probably was on duty that night. So it's just a reassurance to them. Actually, the fundamentals of why we're here, to prevent crime, to preserve the peace, to protect society, protect each other, protect ourselves. So, and it was a restatement of that. And I felt it was important just in the context of what I'd seen happen the night before.
Assistant Commissioner, is there anything you want to add briefly in relation to that?
Just from a feedback point of view, what we found with the operational debrief, of the 186 responses we got in the questionnaires, only 9 members referenced a lack of confidence in using force, which is 5%, I think.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, Assistant Commissioner, earlier on you were talking, I think, about the a community impact assessment being undertaken. I just wonder, in the wake of what happened, has there been discussion and engagement with the local community about the impact of the riots? And if there has been, what has the feedback been?
There has been. So I have tasked our National Community Engagement unit to carry out this community impact assessment. And it's still ongoing and it's being finalised. As I said earlier, I am told that the impact is assessed as medium. But I do know in some sections, for example, in the migrant and minorities communities, it was assessed as high, but overall a medium. But I'll be able to give the full breakdown of that in the report, hopefully in the short while.
Okay. And that brings me on to my last question, because it touches on that final point that the Assistant Commissioner made. Commissioner, you'll obviously be aware that over the last, I suppose, year, we've been quite regularly asking you at public meetings about Garda Síochána's response to what appears to be a growing phenomenon of right-wing aggression, violence, protests. And I'm just wondering, now looking back after the last 12 months, not just in the context of the events in Dublin that we've been discussing, but in the context of the arson attack at the weekend and what appears to be now quite regular arson attacks on direct provision centres and other locations that are either housing or are going to house immigrants or asylum seekers. Are you concerned about the growing number of these attacks, and is there a concern that these are organised in any way?
Well, just to some of the statistics to set this in context. So in Dublin metropolitan region this year to the 11th of December, 585 protests have taken place. 227 of those related to anti-immigration, housing of refugees, and so that's a very considerable number of protests that have to be placed. So that's just a growing facet of our work. Together then with incidents, as you correctly pointed out, at centres of accommodation for those seeking international protection, and following the damage by fire, well, really the gutting of the premises on Saturday evening, there's a full investigation in place. We've had similar instances, and we've had individuals charged with criminal damage in respect of such incidents as well. But I would say, just in terms of just Dublin itself, we've had 52 persons arrested during the policing of protests. And so we have been active in terms of making sure the law is enforced and then pursuing individuals after events as well. So, and these matters then are reported obviously to Director of Public Prosecutions. But there's perhaps a growing concern, and this is a concern seen across Europe, just the rise of political extremism and then the attendant protests and violence then that follow. And obviously the far right are an element of that.
But sorry, just to try to bring that a little bit further, I appreciate that there have been lots of protests and that's a challenge for the police in Dublin especially. And some of those protests have been peaceful and maybe some veer into more aggressive encounters with Garda Síochána. But I suppose my question relates more to what appears to be a growing an escalation in serious arson attacks across the country. I mean, there was a recent media report that suggested these were running at about one a month in the last 12 months. Is there a concern that these are the result of organised efforts by groups that are taking place? And if that is the case, are you concerned that there's an intelligence gap in relation to the activities of some of these individuals or groups?
Well, all of these incidents have been investigated, and there's no evidence to suggest that there's a coordinated effort, but that there's some, in effect, invisible hand or guiding hand in terms of these attacks. The premises on Saturday night, very remote, very difficult to find, and regrettably, it have to be said that the suspects in respect of that are most probably living quite close in that area, and we have to conduct an investigation. We'll pursue the evidence, but obviously we want to identify those who carried out such a damaging attack, as we've done in other cases in terms of charges for criminal damage. But I think it's easy to blame some nebulous but ill-defined group who are in effect plotting and planning and driving all of this from the centre, when actually this is a lot based on prejudice and ill-informed comment driven at a local level as well. There's an element of that too.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. So the focus of my questioning is you're looking at a review, and I'm trying to tease out the parameters of that review. And what I seek to do now is look at a report that was conducted in the UK in the aftermath of the riots in 2011, and some of the areas that they looked at, which I think, given what you've talked about today, has echoes and there's similar themes. So I just want to put, I accept there are two different jurisdictions, and I accept that there are some similarities and there are not other similarities, but the purpose of what I want to do really is put some of the findings of those reviews, that review, to you, and to see if these are things and matters that you're considering in your review, because whereas the riots were something that were very shocking and surprising to Irish people, you know, there are many jurisdictions that experience these things on a regular basis. So the first, this is from the House of Commons Home Affairs Committee, Policing Large-Scale Disorder, Lessons from the Disturbances of the London Riots. And one of the lessons that they found in terms of lack of powers, and there was a narrative around the London riots that there was a lack of powers, and they found that there was no sense that the law needed to be changed to give police more power to tackle public disorder. And on the use of force, which is also a narrative in the aftermath of the Irish riots, it found that baton rounds and water cannon were not considered suitable for the type of situations they encountered in a riot situation, because such tactics would have inflamed and escalated the riots in that context. So, you know, is that something that you're looking at? Is that something you agree with in an Irish context? Are there lessons from that particular finding? And I'm going to put other findings to you in a moment. Are there lessons from that particular finding that are relevant in an Irish context?
Well, we obviously haven't ruled out. We obviously haven't ruled out the use of water cannon. We've made them available should there be serious disorder. But it is a graduated response that we do engage in, and that would be in terms of just you know, like a tactic that we have, but one which you would only consider sort of in terms of last resort. So in terms just then of the legislation, we have our own Criminal Justice Public Order Act that does provide legislation which in respect of given direction, and it's an offence then not to comply, but then we have legislation which covers riot and violent disorder. So and beyond that then, offences around the damage of buses, the Lewis, vehicles, assault, all are well covered. Like our criminal code is very comprehensive in terms of the offences we saw that night. The use of force piece, that's already been covered off by AC Cleary, and but undoubtedly that debate will carry on. but at the same time, we will have a full account in terms of the use of force that was used by personnel as set out. So things like shield strikes, use of handcuffs, etc. So these are all matters of concern. I have to say, in terms of the review, AC Hillman is still to submit the full terms of reference for that, but in part we wanted to wait to see AC Cleary's report first before finalising on that terms of reference.
So, thanks, Commissioner. I guess that review also looked at that certain types of use of force can escalate a situation. So is that something that you're looking at in particular? They found that water cannons and baton rounds escalated the situation. There was a very striking comment by the Commissioner, the then Commissioner Tim Goodwin, who said he takes great pride in the fact that we filled up prison places as opposed to hospital beds. So there is this discussion we're having in Ireland in terms of use of force and the appropriate use of force. So where would you view his comments in that context?
Well, we've already made decisions ourselves in terms of the parameters around the tactics we wish to use. So baton rounds, as you refer to them there, we've already decided ourselves that's not a tactic that we'd wish to deploy. And I presume that Mr. Goodwin's comments are in respect to use of baton rounds. The same cannot be said of the use of water cannon in terms of serious injury. They seem to be an effective intervention right across the continent, and there's a very particular view taken of its use in Great Britain.
And another narrative in that report, and one that has come up in the context of the riots here, was the anticipation. I hear that word a lot. Whether something should have been anticipated or not, and that report goes into interesting detail about, with all the will in the world, some things can never be anticipated, and the scale of things can never be anticipated. But I want to talk about not just anticipating something before it happened. I want to talk about a different type of anticipation, the anticipation when something is happening. And in that report, the heart of that report really focused on police guidance and training. And the failure, a key finding in that report was the failure to identify the nature of activity within the crowd. And it pointed to a mindset of policing where police operated as if they were policing legitimate events, such as a protest, and treated it as a challenge to public order offences instead of criminal activity. So do you have any comment on that in terms of, I've heard the word tactics used, but in terms of anticipating things as they were happening, and the type of policing that was done, and the mindset of the policing, whether it was policing of a public order event or policing a criminal activity?
I might point just to the complexity of the day. And in terms of anticipation, from the 20th of September, we had public order on every day in Dublin. So we did recognise the tensions that were evident in respect of protest activity, and that was clear to us, and we made what we felt was the appropriate intervention around resources that were available. Then on the night itself, as resources in effect arrived as quickly as they could. From, I would say, 4 o'clock onwards, the profile was changing towards public order. So those members who had been on duty at the scene and on the cordon points, who were public order trained, were returning to Station 2 then to in effect be redetailed for public order duties. So there was an anticipation right from about 4 o'clock onwards that this was going to develop into a public order situation. We knew there was more resources would come online within Dublin Metropolitan Region at 6 o'clock in terms of public order unit. We knew at 7 o'clock we'd have a full changeover of personnel, but also then the call went out to the neighbouring region, Eastern Region, for additional resources. And as those resources arrived, then we were able to change our profile. But certainly it was a riot we were dealing with. They were intent on destruction. but as I've already said, there was a number of elements to that between protest and according point, those engaged in destruction, and then those engaged in looting activity. And not all of those, some individuals clearly involved themselves in all of those, and some didn't.
And I appreciate your explanation about what happened on the day, but in the context of the review, Commissioner, is this something you're considering in terms of reference about the mindset of policing public order events as opposed to policing a criminal activity? And I just raise it again because it was the key finding in that particular report on the police finding to the riots, the mindset of policing.
Yes, of course, if we can learn from other jurisdictions, we'll do so. But what's very different between this and the 2011 riots in London was just the scale and how, they went on for 4 days there. And when we had the resources in place, that this was really quelled within an hour and a half. And I think some of the frustration in respect to the communications was the efforts to try and kettle individuals so that we were able to make mass arrests. And that was some of the frustrations. That people just to coordinate all of that, and that's just very complex in a city like Dublin where there's so many streets and alleys, etc., for people to scoot off on us.
And another key finding and the focus of that report, and is it this something that you may consider in your review, is they found that the number of people who were trained in public order was quite low. So in the Met they have 3 categories of public order training: level 1, level 2 and level 3. Level 3 being the least serious, and all police officers are trained in this. But they found, and a significant finding was, there wasn't sufficient people trained at level 2. So are you satisfied and happy that there are sufficient people on Garda Síochána who have adequate public order training?
But we haven't come to a final conclusion in respect to that. We have approximately 1,100 personnel who are trained in full public order training, plus all of their equipment. And I think it's one of the things we just need to consider. Do we need a second tier, particularly here in Dublin? But that's something then for the review and to take feedback on. So there was a lot of feedback initially around all the Garda members not having access to helmets. And in effect at a soft line following on behind public order personnel at a distance maybe of 50 yards, and then they dealing with the arrests that were made. But whether we need to look again at that, that's certainly something then that we'll actively consider. And so that tiered response commensurate to where you're policing, I think is important to consider.
And as you said, in London it went on for 4 days. But there is a striking similarity between what happened in London and what happened in Dublin, in the sense that one of their key findings was that there was relatively low levels of public disorder in the run-up to what happened in London. So they found that there was police training in that particular area of public order training was insignificant. And you could argue that thankfully there's been relatively low levels of public disorder in Ireland as well. The last time that the police here might have met that was 15, 16 years ago, and so it's quite understandable that people mightn't have been sufficiently trained. But that was a key finding in the London riots case. So I was just, is that another element of your review you might look at?
I might be able to assist with that, Commissioner.
All right, sorry.
Just to give you an indication, the number of members trained in public order has increased significantly in the last 18 months. And to give you an example, in the DMR alone, they've currently 523 trained, where in 2019 it was 294. And that's made up of 2 chiefs, 3 supers, 11 inspectors, 41 sergeants and 467 guards. And in addition to that then, they now have 15 tactical advisors, trainers, which is 1 inspector, 7 sergeants and 7 guards. And they also have 13 public order unit operational commanders. So those numbers have increased significantly in the last 18 months.
So what I want to dig in then on that particular issue is not just that people are trained, but the type of training that they get. And again, a key finding was the necessity for people who are trained in public order to have flexibility, spontaneity, discretion, so that on the ground that they can make those decisions. And it's one thing to have people trained, but it's quite another thing to have what they termed as appropriate police commanders. So a key finding was to identify key individuals who have the leadership skills in such a situation as you found yourselves a couple of weeks ago, that that can deal with that spontaneity on the ground when things happen, because as you know, when riots take a life of their own, but there's a particular dynamic and there's a particular response that needs to happen to that incident. So that was one of the key findings as well. It's not just about being trained, but it's the type of training, and it's about the identification of individuals who can have that leadership and provide the flexibility and discretion on the ground as needs be.
And our leadership of the public order cadre is focused on those individuals who have an aptitude and can bring experience to bear in terms of dealing with public order situations, and they were on the ground that night, both in terms of the Chief Superintendent for Public Order, but also then the superintendents and inspectors who were all on the ground. And I'm familiar just with some of the drawbacks around the UK's approach to public order policing, and a lot of that became very much focused in the command room. And whereas that is not the situation that pertains here within Garda Síochána, we had a very active and senior leadership out on the ground, and people were, our people in Garda Síochána were responding to the situation as it unfolded in front of them, dealing then with, as the group splintered, dealing with the various groups, and again making arrests. So I think that was an important contribution on the night. The amount of arrests were being made, and that's a very live deterrent to those engaged in riot at that time.
Is there anything you do differently?
There's learning here for us, and that's why we've engaged in this operational debrief, and then the review that we'll undertake. So I do think we want to just review our tactics and the equipment that we have available as well, and how maybe that level 2 personnel are trained up. And that's why we've spoke to the availability of things like the round shield, so a lighter shield, more mobile personnel then, and just also then the nature of the protective equipment. We want to review the communications piece has been talked about, but we just want to look to see how well our other equipment actually worked on the night. The shield lines themselves were very robust and did work well, and were able to deal with the disorder in front of them, and in fact actually dealt with it very well around making arrests and then the criminal justice response. So I think given that this was in effect spontaneous, and we didn't have a run-up to this in terms of pre-plan ourselves and pre-plan scenarios, etc. There was a very agile response to an evolving situation on the night, but we just want to make sure that we're well placed should something like this happen again. And obviously then part of that is acquiring our own water cannon as well.
Is there anything you do differently in terms of tactics?
Again, I just want this debrief and the review to work through. There are, we have set down parameters of what we're prepared to consider and what we're not prepared to consider, and then that will dictate the tactics then that we use. So we just want to be, thoughtful, because we have then that will have a training implication as well. But the object of this is to make sure, well, if we're faced with this scenario again, it's dealt with quickly, and peace is brought to our streets again, and also then that we can apprehend offenders as well. I think another significant improvement will be the advent of the body-worn camera. So we've over 12,000 hours now of CCTV footage If all the members had been wearing body-worn camera, we would have had footage of people at the point of protest, including what they said, and that would have been important evidence. Plus, then we could have added that evidence to the CCTV. So that's a significant improvement. That's online as well, online for us as well.
And are you satisfied about the level of intelligence gathering that An Garda Síochána are involved in? Are you satisfied that you have sight of the relevant social media platforms where these things are being discussed?
Some of the platforms are closed, and therefore then very difficult to penetrate, but that's what our intelligence effort is set up there to do. But I want us to recognise the initial incident. In effect, there was no pre-warning in respect of that, and no intelligence system would have given an indication that was going to happen. And at that point, then we were then responding. And as I've already commented on, I think was very significant for us was the speed with which information flowed, followed very quickly by disinformation and very disingenuous information, designed specifically to stoke tension. So, and I don't want, and I'm not going to repeat it, but and that's an important point for us in all of this is then just the communications that we put out as best we're able, because the way the algorithms are, that different people of different age see different things on social media, and just the the penetration of our social media and other government social media can be limited in those circumstances.
And that actually was another finding in the London riots, even though it was almost 15 years ago, that this perception which was relayed on social media that the police had lost control of the streets had fueled perception for more and more people to come in and join the fray. So as I said, the purpose of my questioning is, I guess, to encourage a broad range of reference when looking at this particular issue, and one that could be informed by what's happened in other jurisdictions. And I accept there are different jurisdictions, and the style of policing there might not be appropriate here, but it's also important that Irish people understand why it's not appropriate, and and that statement by the London Commissioner, the UK Commissioner, about that he was proud that he was able to have people in prison rather than people in hospital is one I think that we seek to advocate here as well, that it's the criminal justice route rather than the baton ram route. But that was my contribution. I know my colleague Anthony Harbison has also contributed on these reports in his other roles, so perhaps he's questions later on as well.
Commissioner, you mentioned the use of kettling, which is a fairly standard approach in public order, but you said you weren't really able to use it in Dublin because of the alleys and side streets. Does that mean you didn't use it on the night?
It was attempted, but even that night as I walked the streets, and you could see just where people were dodging down through every hole in the hedge, really, across the bridges and down through the alleys and byways and streets. In effect, the city centre is just a complete lattice of streets and alleys and bridges, etc. And so very difficult to get the group concentrated. And in any case, by the time we were doing that, they were in full evasion mode and wanting to get away as well. So it just, tactically it didn't work out for us on the night. It's something for us to think about again in the future. It would have required a pre-planned element, because we would have had to have sufficient to take the bridges. You're talking probably on that night, we would need to have a sufficient to take 8-9 bridges.
You also mentioned the fact that obviously a lot of this occurred over an hour-and-a-half period of real intensity, but didn't fall really into the following nights. Do you think that was a direct result of the approaches that you took on the night?
Well, I think I think in the first place, everyone, the wider population was so genuinely shocked by what happened and the scale of what happened. Secondly, then, the number of arrests that had been made that night, and subsequent arrests the next day. But also then the presence that we had out on the ground from Friday onwards as well had a real deterrent effect. And we did prepare for, in effect, major protest and perhaps even major disorder. But the protest activity in itself didn't emerge. And indeed then other groups who had planned protests for that weekend, entirely unconnected to this, cancelled their protests as well. So footfall was down certainly on the Saturday and Sunday. That was visible, and I know that the shops weren't as busy as it had been. But again, on the Friday, there was a huge amount of disinformation put out, and it was a repeat of footage from the day before. And so that's in part what we were countering, and people were making contact with us saying, is it safe? Is something happening on the Friday afternoon, for instance? And it was just a repeat of the footage from the day before.
Sorry, if I could raise a number of questions, Commissioner, just arising from all of the engagement for which our thanks. On that question of social media outlets, has there been much engagement, if any, engagement with Comisiún Yaman, the new Media Commission, which will have significant powers in relation to social media platforms, specifically arising from the events or in advance of that, just in relation to the interest that the Garda Síochána would have on the extent to which social media can be abused for these purposes as opposed to used,
my colleague AC Kelly's leading on that area. There's an effect from that day, 3 investigations ongoing. One obviously in relation to the initial incident. The second, a very major investigation as well in respect of the disorder, but the third investigation relates to comments that might have been made online, and both in the run-up to the disorder and subsequent to it. So that's been led by the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and Assistant Commissioner Kelly then is taking the lead in terms of those approaches. So it is an element around our engagement, but also I think there's learning from us from the night in question about how proactive to be with the social media companies and how proactive they were as well. Some were and some weren't.
And the potential in terms of the broader policy questions and the regulatory framework that will emerge through Comisiún Yaman. There would appear to be opportunities there for the Garda Síochána to engage with them precisely because of the depth of the understanding that you have of the extent to which these channels can be used for inappropriate purposes.
Well, we have yet to provide that feedback in detail, and then having done so, then we can have the policy discussion about what else should be done in response to, in effect, social media being used to foment violence and serious disorder and spread misinformation for that purpose.
We've spoken before about the extent to which there may have been information gaps between central government and Gardaí in relation to the location of those seeking international protection. Is that gap firmly closed now, and do you always have advance notice of where the assignments of international protection people will be? And that raises the related question, does that then identify locations which you would want to monitor if you have the capacity to monitor them in the light of the extent to which some of these areas have been the subject of attacks and successful arson attempts?
So what I would say in response to that is notification is invariably very late in the day. and it's a constant challenge, I suppose, I have to be honest. And certainly if we take the events at Uachtarard over the weekend, that was certainly very late notification. And it came an informal route as opposed through the centre.
And without asking you an awkward question or putting you in an awkward position, has the need for this information been raised at the most senior levels so that the Garda Síochána are early in the information chain as opposed to others who may have information before the Garda Síochána? And as we've heard from time to time from your colleagues around the country, they might be informed by a local council or be informed by somebody who is commissioned to do a piece of work on a property. Have you raised this question at sufficiently high level and with a sufficient degree of urgency?
This goes back to learnings from the protest at Santry, and so from and then other related protests. So that you're going back to May, and just whenever it became clear that there was obviously an increase in premises where those seeking international protection were residing, and then also a rise in number of protests. But we do also recognise that I think there's some 250 individuals now without any form of accommodation, and so there's huge pressure to find accommodation for them, particularly at this time of year. But we'll want to be in, I suppose, the loop early on so that we can plan in terms of our policing response. Even if we don't have to be there all the time, at least then we can pre-plan what our response should be, but also liaison with the owner of the premises and in relation to their security arrangements. Now that has worked well in some places and other places not so well, and often with poor results as well.
And you've led me into what was going to be another question, and that is those people who are now not being able to be provided with publicly provided, publicly procured accommodation, and who are given tents and sleeping bags. Is there any liaison with the Garda Síochána in relation to the numbers, the timing, the location of people who are in that position, and is there an evaluation of the risk to which those people may be exposed, particularly in the context of the anti-immigrant and sometimes openly racist character of some of the commentary?
So there is a central point of contact in our liaison and protection section, which is the central point of contact for government and the route in through which we're notified. But in terms of where, in terms of the opportunity to carry out a risk assessment, that's very limited because we wouldn't be made aware of where, maybe people looking for accommodation would tent up, as it were. And I suppose I'm saying that it is important that we are notified, because we have a role to play in terms of keeping people safe. That's our mission. We're also acutely aware that these people are arriving in the country from, fleeing persecution and coming from war-torn countries and all sorts of disadvantage. And they're coming to Ireland, I suppose, looking for refuge and I suppose to get a roof over their head and some stability in their lives. So I suppose as the police service in the country, we have a role to play in terms of keeping them safe, being proactive in terms of preventing any sort of anti-migrant sentiment or anti-migrant activity. So I suppose the inclusion of Garda Síochána in that information loop is of critical importance at the earliest stage possible.
For anybody to be homeless is a serious problem with which to have to cope, especially at this time of the year, both in terms of the expectations of people at Christmas, but also in terms of the weather that people have to cope with. Has there been, and precisely engaging what you've said, Deputy Commissioner, the role of the Garda Síochána in keeping people safe, has there been any engagement with government on your part about the desirability of, or the need to identify possible locations where people who have been presented with tents and sleeping bags might be located, such that they, and I don't want to presume on using part of the Defence Forces establishments, but where they might at least be feel safer in closed area where there are supportive and defensive elements.
Yeah.
I might turn to Cliona just to set out the situation in DMR around liaison inspectors, please.
Thanks, Richard. Yes, in the city centre in particular, there's liaison inspectors put in place to liaise both with IPAS and also the homeless service as well, to ensure that, I suppose, post the incident in Sandwich Street, that we're there to be able to liaise and find out where people are. So that's regular liaison ongoing. It doesn't negate what the wider issue in relation to it, but there is close cooperation there, particularly around where tents are and where we wouldn't be saying where people are accommodated, because it's not for us to say that. However, when a situation like that arises where there may be people in tents, not the hope, but the intention is there that liaison takes place to ensure that from the city centre point of view, both from residents and people that come into the city centre, that area can be safe and for all to use. But again, those liaison inspectors are in place and they are engaging from a city centre point of view.
Thanks,
but Chair, we wouldn't be identifying locations or engaged in that activity. Yeah.
No, but you might nonetheless have more informed views than many who are engaging in the discourse on this particular topic, precisely because of your experience of the challenge of keeping people safe. One final thing. Well, before the final thing, because we've spoken about this before, it seems very striking that the Garda Síochána are still not as early in the information loop as you clearly would wish to be, and that is striking in terms of the responsibility that various departments or agencies of state have in terms of the deployment or location of people, and to give them the best possible opportunity of being safe where they go. And it would not be right to let it pass without noting the continuing inappropriateness of that absence of engagement. The final thing I was going to ask you, Commissioner, in some of the earlier discussions that we've had over the last 12, 18 months about the policing of protests or demonstrations of one kind or another, recognising the constitutional protection to freedom of expression and the right to assemble peaceably, as the Constitution puts it, it is clear, if nothing else is clear from the 23rd of November, that there are some people who don't need any excuse, don't need any provocation to resort to violence, and are apparently happy to put themselves into positions where they might appear to be, if the wrong events happened, be able to portray themselves as martyrs, but they don't need any excuse to engage in violence. Does that alter the calibration in terms of the approach generally to these unorganised, unannounced coming together of people? Protest is too weak a word for some of the activity.
Protest as a legitimate activity is not actually their intention either. Their intention is to intimidate at the least. And I think part of our calculus in this is there actually someone to engage with? in terms of negotiation around what form of protest will take and what the acceptable behaviours are, etc., and the limits and time, routes, timings, routes, etc. If you don't have that, then you immediately start to have red flags around the nature of this, because without a point of negotiation, then there's no one taking responsibility, and therefore then you're dealing with an uncoordinated group, and that then can give rise to issue. And we've seen this happening in terms of protests that are organised, and there are identifiable individuals that you can deal with and negotiate a process, and often then that is very successful in terms of keeping the peace. But then other groups who are dissatisfied with that peel off to do their own thing, and that inevitably then means an active response on our part in terms of managing their risk to public order and prevent breach of the peace.
Thank you, Commissioner. And before offering a general thanks for this afternoon, I was struck by one of the pieces of information that Assistant Commissioner Cleary provided us, and that is less than 5% of those who responded, Gardaí who responded, expressed anything resembling a lack of confidence in the issue of the use of force, which is sharply at variance with a lot of the media discourse in the days after the events on the 23rd of November, which has something which merits reflection as well by the media, perhaps more than anybody else. Thank you for the opportunity to have this meeting in public. Thank you for the openness and frankness with which many of the questions, well, all of the questions were responded to. We look forward to receiving AC Cleary's report when it is completed, recognising that it will be in confidence, but in the same way that Assistant Commissioner Barry O'Brien's report on the Uncosson event a number of years ago was also confidential, but was the basis for many very productive private and public conversations on these issues. So the authority looks forward to receiving that. Some of us will not be here to engage with it because it is the last meeting of Valerie and Paul and myself. Morning, sorry, I beg your pardon. I couldn't see Morning. Paul was the face that I saw. I beg your pardon. You see, it's time for me to go, obviously. And I just wanted to take this opportunity. We didn't think in Waterford that we were going to have this meeting when Deputy Commissioner McMahon was gracious about the departure of the three of us. But to take this opportunity in your presence, Commissioner, to thank you for your own engagements with us over the years and for your availability, unfailing availability, and your willingness to say things that perhaps many in your organisation would wish you hadn't said at public meetings of the authority. So thank you for today and to your colleagues, and thank you to my own colleagues as well. And just to reassure you all that Paul will be a continuing member of the authority for as long as ye both shall live. This meeting is now over. Thank you.
Well, if I just 1 second, I'd want to echo remarks from Anne-Marie from last month, and we meet in happier circumstances than last month, certainly, and just to acknowledge the work of Valerie, Bob and Moling in all the years I've been working here, that just now over 5, and the contribution that you've made to policing here in Ireland in terms of the oversight and the feedback. And as I say, steel sharpens steel, and that's the whole point of this, that we have a good, productive relationship that improves the quality of the policing service in Ireland, and you've all made a great contribution, and we thank you heartily for that. Thanks very much. Thank you.